So what were you doing in the 2008 flood, and how did the flood affect you?
Yeah, so I was actually in New Hampshire on sabbatical that year. So it was surprising because I watched it online and on the television and everything, and they had set up the camera that showed where how high it was relative to the various bridges and all that. And that was tough. It's weird because I felt like if I was here, then maybe I could help with sandbagging or something. But it's weird when your city is undergoing a disaster and all you can do is sit back and watch. So anyway, that's how it affected me. But mostly because I was sitting in my warm room in New Hampshire. I was fine.
How natural were these disasters? Basically, like, was there anything that could have anything that was ignored that could have been done to prevent the impacts of the flood? Like anything, like in preventative measures, I guess.
Well, so I would say the recent flooding is not sort of natural in the long-term sense. We have seen a significant increase in the amount of flooding, and we expect to see more of that. And there are two causes for that. One is climate change. We are seeing more rain in sort of shorter bursts, so more of the type of rain that's going to cause flood, and that we've measured that in Iowa. So we know that we're getting more of that. So that's part of it. And the other part of it is that development has led to development of both agricultural and residential and commercial areas. They lead to more rapid movement of water into the rivers. So if you're building a parking lot, you want that water to run off the parking lot. Well, so you run it off the parking lot into a stream, and what used to take a long time to get to that stream all gets there in one pulse. And so you get more rapid movement of water, and that leads to worse floods. So the recent flooding has been caused mostly by climate change and development of the watershed.
It's really interesting. Who do you feel like was affected the worst by the floods here in the Midwest?
Right. Well, certainly in Des Moines, the Birdland levee broke, and so people in that neighborhood, they got their homes flooded. And there was also obviously flooding in the downtown area and so on. But certainly the worst in Des Moines was probably in Birdland neighborhood because of the levee breaking. It had major impacts on agriculture just because people weren't able to plant crops, and so people in flooded areas obviously they were impacted pretty negatively. Obviously, if you're talking about Iowa in general, like University of Iowa, they lost, and Cedar Rapids, both just lost a large number of buildings and had some real significant impacts there.
What was done after 2008 floods to avoid future flooding, as far as just any level of the government, state, or city? What did they do to prevent this from happening?
Yeah, well, so we haven't done much to prevent it from happening in the sense that the two, like I said, the two major causes are climate change and development, and we haven't done anything to address those. The Army Corps of Engineers came out with a new flood map, right? So the flood map that we built everything on was based on old data. Now that we have things changing, they came out with a new flood map, and that's always really controversial because on the one hand, it's just, well, here's what the science says, here's where it's going to be flooded. But you can also imagine that if you were not in the floodplain, like you thought that you bought property in a reasonable place, and then the new flood map comes out, and now suddenly you're in the floodplain, well, you're not going to be able to get the flood insurance that you used to be able to get, and so on. So, so property owners, were very upset when that new flood map came out, and there was a lot of controversy about that. But We do have a new flood map out now, so that will change some of the future development within areas that are on that in the new floodplain. Those will be harder to develop in the future, although certainly places that have already been developed, they're not going to, they're going to stay there until it floods. But then that also, in Des Moines, that identified that significant parts of the city are now in the floodplain. And so the city's trying to figure out, how do we address that issue? How do we deal with this, the fact that our city is now more prone to flooding? And what they're looking at is dredging and clearing out some of the river south of the city, so that the water that right now is kind of backing up in the Des Moines and where the rivers converge and flooding the city, that water can flow out more quickly and get away from Des Moines. And so that's critical for the city to do, because we can't have the city flooding. But that's the kind of thing that if everybody does that, then you get more of this issue that I'm talking about, where you try to get the water away from you as quickly as possible. That means that when there's a lot of water, it just builds up downstream, and so that makes flooding worse downstream. So the city needs to figure out how to prevent flooding for itself, but then that also is part of this larger issue.
All right, and this question, just what can we do as residents just to protect ourselves against floods in the future? What can we personally do?
Right. Well, I mean, the most obvious is pay attention to where your home is on as far as flooding is concerned. Often some of the most beautiful parts of a city are the ones right down by the river. And that's often fine if there are other places for the water to go and so on. But we know that sometimes the levees break. I mean, it happened in Birdland, and it'll happen again. And so you need to be very careful when you think about buying a house where you're going to put that house, or where you're going to buy, because there are some houses that, like I said, are now in danger that weren't in danger when they were built. So you can try to make sure that you're well away from the floodplain. Make sure that you're not protected by a older levee. Those kind of things. As far as once the flooding starts, I mean, some people sandbag, and you can do that, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. But the most important thing is to make sure that you're safe. I mean, what happens often is that people freak out when there's flooding, and we're used to being able to drive places, and people see water rushing across the street, and they think, okay, what I got to do is drive fast enough that that water doesn't, I can get through. But what they don't realize is that the street has washed out underneath the water, and so they try to drive across, and that's where most of the deaths happen, is people try to drive across the river, and their cars get caught because they don't realize the street is gone, and so their cars get caught in the water and they drown. So never drive across, during a flood, never drive across a street that has water rushing across it. If you can't see the street, then you want to be very, very cautious. Much better to lose your car than to get caught in a situation like that.